This lecture is looking at some of the molecules and compounds and some of the parts that make up the cells of your body and that make those cells function. We're going to start by just kind of quickly talking about acids and bases. If you took chemistry, you definitely talked about acids and bases, and if not, maybe these are phrases you've heard of before. But acids and bases are substances that have opposite levels of different chemical components. So acids have a high concentration of an ion called hydrogen, or H+, and bases have a high concentration of hydroxide. That's what this ion is, a hydroxide ion. And they are opposite because they behave in really different ways, but acids and bases are both equally important because they have a lot to do with the way that the body maintains blood pressure, the way that we breathe, as well as a lot of other systems that we'll look at going forward. The way that doctors monitor your levels of acids and bases is by taking a measurement of what's called pH. pH tells us how many hydrogen ions are in the blood, or in anything, actually, but generally we measure your blood to check on pH levels. And 0 means that this is a very, very, very strong acid. There's no stronger acid in the world than hydrochloric acid, which is written or abbreviated HCl. Hydrochloric acid has a pH between 0 and 1. And then the opposite level of the opposite reading on the pH scale is 14. That means it's a very basic substance and it has a lot of hydroxide. Neutral, or kind of right in the middle, is right around 7, and blood pH is generally between 7.2 and 7.4, so right at the neutral level. In your body, there are a lot of compounds called buffers that are small chemicals generally that help to kind of absorb extra levels of hydrogen or extra levels of hydroxide and keep your pH right around neutral. In the body, we classify the different chemicals in two basic ways. There is organic, which means it has carbon. Organic has to have carbon, and it almost always has oxygen as well. These are the most common two elements in the human body. They make up a huge percentage of all of your cells, all of your tissues. When we add organic compounds to water, they stay neutral. They don't cause the water to become acidic or basic. They don't really break up into any kind of charged particles. So organic compounds are generally considered to be non-electrolytes. That means they do not conduct electricity. That's what electrolyte means. So organic compounds do not conduct electricity. Inorganic compounds, on the other hand, when you add them to water, these are things like salt, carbon dioxide, all kinds of other compounds. When they are added to water, they break apart instantly and they form these little charged particles, positive and negative, positive and negative. And what that means is that they do conduct electricity. That's why they're called electrolytes. And if you are an athlete or you have ever gotten a really bad stomach flu, a lot of times your doctor will tell you to replace the electrolytes in your blood. So this is what Gatorade claims to do. It gives you some of these charged particles so that the blood can reestablish the balance of positive and negative and the balance of acids and bases. Some of the most common inorganic substances are shown here. So water, right? There's no carbon. Water is just 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. We've already talked about the fact that it's almost 3/4 of the makeup of your body, and it's used to provide for a home or an environment for almost every chemical reaction that takes place. It is incredibly important in the body. It also helps to transport other substances through the blood, and interestingly enough, it absorbs heat really well, so it helps your body to stay at a balanced temperature. I bet that's something you didn't know about water. And one of the other common inorganic substances is oxygen. its compound is O2, right? No carbon there. And you all know what oxygen does. It's important for breathing. It helps to provide the muscles with basically a source for creating energy or pulling the energy from food so your body can use it. Other common substances, carbon dioxide, right? Oxygen goes in and carbon dioxide goes back out. It's a waste product. Then there are tons and tons of salts. We think of salt as being the thing you add onto your food, and that's one very, very common salt. That's called sodium chloride. But there are tons of other salts in the body as well, many of which include calcium and potassium. That's the symbol for potassium, and magnesium, just to name a few. The organic compounds are where we're going to kind of spend a lot of our time today. There are 4 basic groups of organic compounds. Again, they all include carbon and oxygen. They also all include hydrogen. The organic compounds in your body all include hydrogen. So the first one, number 1 of 4, is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are often called sugars. They are the same thing. So sugars or carbohydrates have a very specific ratio of chemicals. There's always carbon and oxygen that are equal. However many carbons there are, there's an equal number of oxygens. And however many carbons there are, there is usually twice as many hydrogens. These numbers are important because the bonds between carbon and hydrogen and the bonds between carbon and oxygen break and they release energy. And that's what your body uses to fuel it to, do anything, breathe, move, blink, etc. So a lot of times we refer to carbohydrates based on how big they are. So super small sugars, which usually look like an octagon or a little home base. They are just little chains of carbons with hydrogens and oxygens sticking out the side. These are called monosaccharides. It means one sugar, just one ring of sugar. It's pretty uncommon to come across monosaccharides in day-to-day life. Generally, we deal with much larger sugar compounds. If there are 2 of these rings, it's called a disaccharide. If there are 3 or more of these rings, it's called polysaccharide. And this is what we generally deal with. Some of the sugars you might have heard are sucrose, that's table sugar. Fructose, that's fruit sugar. Glucose, that's blood sugar. Starch is a huge polysaccharide found in nearly everything. And then glycogen is another sugar product that you find in your blood. The second organic compound is called lipids, and another much more common term for lipids is fats. So fats are found in the body, and they're super important. The thing that's interesting about them is they have the exact same parts as sugars. They have carbon, they have hydrogen, they have oxygen. But in this case, the carbons and the oxygens are not equal. There are way more carbons than there are oxygens, and that causes them to behave differently in the body. One of the big differences is they are insoluble in water. That means they don't dissolve. So if you were to add a fat, say butter or olive oil, for instance, to a glass of water, it would just sit there and float, right? Here's your water. You add a stick of butter into the water. It's not going to break up. It's just going to sit there. That's much different from adding a sugar. Some common lipids that you would find in your body, cholesterol is a fat, steroids, all this different steroid products, which we will talk more about later, are all fats. Fats are super, super important. They store energy for your body. Sugars, the energy gets used right away. So when you eat, say, a candy bar at lunch, your body uses that sugar pretty much right away. But with the fat part of that candy bar, it gets stored in your cells. So let's say here's the cells of your stomach, for instance, and you've got fat from this candy bar. So each cell takes a little bit of the fat, and it just holds on to it until you need it. If you don't do enough physical exertion to burn through all the sugar in the candy bar, then none of the fat will get burned. It's very, very interesting. The other thing that's really interesting about fats is they give you much more energy, 2 and 3 times as much energy as sugars. So that is very curious as well. There are a couple of ways that we classify fats. Actually, you know what? We're not going to worry about this. I'm just going to tell you the names. So saturated is one type of fat. And this is generally in the human body. This one's a little bit worse for you. Your body has a harder time processing this, and it doesn't treat your body as well as it could. The other kind is called unsaturated. So unsaturated fats are better. These are fats that you would find in things like olive oil and fish oils and avocados and fatty nuts like cashews, for instance. Those are fats, and generally fats are not great for the body, but unsaturated fats are much better because your body metabolizes them differently, and they don't cause as many bad health effects. So when you stick a whole bunch of fats together into a huge long chain, so let's say these are little teeny tiny fat molecules, and we're going to make a chain that goes on for, say, thousands of these. That's called a phospholipid. There's some phosphates sticking out here. Phosphates are little groups of phosphorus and oxygen molecules. But if you look at this big, huge, long chain, phospho for the phosphate molecules, lipids because they include fats, these are really, really, really important for your cell membranes. If you remember back to biology, cell membranes are made up of phospholipids. And we'll be doing a lab later this week looking at how they work. I told you we'd talk about steroids later, but it's just important to know that steroids are a kind of fat. Our third organic compound is proteins. So this is kind of starting to sound like a health class with all of these terms, but proteins make you who you are. Proteins make up hair, skin, muscle, eye color. Lots of your tissue is made of protein, so proteins are incredibly important. They also kind of serve as a name tag in your body system. Every single cell has a little name tag on it in the shape of a particular protein. So there might be a cell that has a little name tag that says, hey, I'm from the heart, and this cell might be from the liver, and there might be another cell that has a different name tag that, says, oh, I'm from the leg bone or whatever. So proteins are super important for identifying different parts of the cell. They also help to fight infection, and they are critically important in metabolism. If your body did not have proteins that act as enzymes, you would never digest your food. You just don't have the space in your stomach to break down all of the food that you eat without the help of enzymes. So they are really, really important. You're going to see some similarities here. Remember, we're dealing with organic compounds. All organic compounds have carbon. All organic compounds have oxygen. I told you all the ones we would look at today would have hydrogen. Some new elements that we haven't talked about yet. Proteins also have nitrogen, and some proteins have sulfur. But that's really not very many different elements considering the huge range of proteins that there are in the body. Because proteins are a macromolecule, that means they have huge structures, right? Big long chains of smaller parts. In this case, the smaller parts, let's pretend we've got a big long protein here. These smaller parts are called amino acids. So each one of these little shapes is its own amino acid. There are about 20 of them. And the order of amino acids, think of this amino acid as having a letter, like L maybe, and this amino acid has another letter and it's O, and this amino acid has its own letter and it's V, and this amino acid has its own letter and it's E. So depending on the order that you put these amino acids in, you can spell different words. In this case, I've spelled love. Oh, so sweet. But these letters can be rearranged to make any number of hundreds of proteins. That's exactly how amino acids work. They each have their own letter, but then you can rearrange the letters, just like in a game of Scrabble or Words with Friends. And those letters spell different words. Those different words represent different proteins. So I just told you that each protein has its own set of letters in their own shape. The way that we see that when we look at pictures of proteins, say under a microscope, is it has proteins fold themselves into these totally kooky shapes. So they might be this big, huge, long chain of amino acids. I'm going to scoot this for just a second. So we might have this big, huge, long chain, but that long chain is way too big, way too big to fit in a cell. So first that chain will fold itself in half. This is called the primary structure. And then it folds itself in half, which is called the secondary structure. But this is still way too big to fit in a cell. So then let's say maybe it folds itself again in half. And so now we've got this, what's called a tertiary structure. Some proteins are folded so that they look like this. It is an enormous jumbled mess. But every protein has its own particular shape, which is very curious, and people spend their entire academic careers just studying the shapes of proteins and how shape affects behavior. The reason we care about the shape of proteins, we'll look at a couple of videos in class about what happens when protein shapes change, but we can force proteins to change through a process that's called denaturing. So if we heat it up really high in most cases, the protein will lose its shape. We can add light, large amounts of light, energy. There's radiation is another one that really messes with protein shape and structure. And if you change the shape and structure of a protein and the way it's meant to behave, it seriously causes problems with everything down the line. So again, I'll show you some examples of this in class. The final thing we're going to talk about is our last group of organic compounds. So this is number 4, and these are nucleic acids. The interesting thing about nucleic acids is they do not come from food. You cannot get your DNA out of a hamburger, for instance. You can get fat, carbohydrates, and proteins from food, and in fact you do. That's why you eat. But nucleic acids are built in the body, by your body, and they are specific to your body. You are very similar to the rest of the humans on the planet, about 99.8% the same, but that 0.2% makes you unique from everybody else, and it's because of the DNA that's made in your body. So let me scoot this for 1 second. We're just about done here. Nucleic acids also have big long chains. These big long chains include a sugar. Let's say that's our sugar. They include a phosphate group, and they include a base. We're going to make this base shaped like this. And then this pattern just repeats. Maybe this base will be shaped like that. So these 3 parts together just repeat. See, if you look at my pattern here, we've got one sugar phosphate base, then another sugar phosphate base, and then this is the start of a third sugar phosphate base. Maybe this base will be shaped like this. Okay. This one unit is called a nucleotide, and a nucleotide is just this 3-component part, sugar, phosphate, base, and it repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats. In your body, believe it or not, you have about 3.1 billion repeating nucleotide units. 3.1 billion, that is insanity. And each one of those nucleotides includes carbon, oxygen, hydrogen. You're getting very familiar with those. Again, nitrogen, and this time, phosphorus. So I just told you in the last section on proteins that we would look at some videos about what happens when proteins go bad, and we will. So there's a link down here, actually. I would encourage you to save this. We're going to watch it in class, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction. But some of the diseases that happen when proteins go bad are mad cow, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. And again, we're going to talk more about that in the next class. So please write a summary of this lecture and bring at least 3 discussion questions to class. You need to have them written in your notes and ready for discussion. Thank you.